better.
Welcome to Deep Look, Ultiworld's weekly radio show about the current state of Ultimate. I am the host and the editor, Charlie Eisenhood. Joining me, Keith Raynor. Keith, what's going on?
Well, just wrapped up conference championships last weekend. Bit of a strange experience. I know we talked a little bit about the conferences and some of the stuff going on around it, and like our men's team was there, and it's not their conference, and then they won it. It was super weird. It was windy, which is unfortunate because I'm tired of playing in windy tournaments, but fortunate because we spent the whole season playing in windy tournaments. So I expect that it'll be the same at regionals because it's going to be in the same site. So we maybe looking at a literal season of nothing but windy tournaments, which is great, especially because we do like half our practices indoors.
It's developing your players, Keith, into better players.
That's why I tell you, look, our zone's getting better and better,
Yes, sir. Well, we're going to take a break from talking college ultimate this week. We're going to, of course, get you ready for regionals starting next week, but we've got more conferences coming up this weekend. And instead, we're going to talk semi-pro, everything semi-pro. And that means we're going to do our AUDL season preview today as they get ready to start, not this weekend, but the following. And since we're going to be talking regionals next week, we figured we would go ahead and get you started with the AUDL season preview this week. Before we get to that, though, let's take a look at what's been going on around the Western Ultimate League and the Premier Ultimate League. Western Ultimate League is getting down to the end here, Keith. Most teams have already played 4 games. Some teams have already finished their season. They've played all 6 of their games. And Seattle has now clinched a playoff spot. No surprise that we, undefeated so far. It's not exactly a shock that they're going to get into the playoffs. San Diego sitting pretty at 3-1. Oregon also with 1 loss at 2-1. And then you've got really those other 4 teams hoping to try to get in. LA is sitting at 2-3. Utah, which has 3 games coming up this weekend at their homestand, they're sitting at 1-2. So if they win all 3 of those games, they're good to go. If they win 2, they're probably in. If they only win 1, then it's more of a question mark. But certainly the playoff picture coming into focus.
Absolutely. San Diego hosted this past weekend and won both their games, and that pushed them near the top of the table, puts them in a great position. Christian Bajunas and Kayla Helton were just kicking butt. Christian Bajunas with 7 blocks in 1 game to set the new league record. And this was not cheap. This is not cheap blocks. This wasn't on the deep in the zone. They're punting it to me. These were legit blocks. Really impressive stuff. Some of them in the clutch, no less, in that win over LA. LA has 1 game remaining, so they probably are in a close to winning in situation. Arizona basically had their winning in situation this past weekend.
Did not win.
They lose. Right, did not win. So at 2-4, they're on the outside looking in. They'll basically need Utah to botch it the rest of the way in order to get in. I mean, at this point, they're on the sidelines watching, just hoping that Utah can't get that second win. And that's obviously a tough space to be in.
The good news for LA is that they hold the head-to-head with Utah after getting the win in LA a couple weeks back. I actually saw Christian Bajunas at the social gathering after the games because I was out here streaming the games, and she said it was the best game she's ever played, and it makes sense. I mean, she was unstoppable, and Kayla Helton has a case for MVP right now. I think, Keith.
I think maybe the strongest case for MVP.
Yeah.
If the season ended today, now partially that's because some players haven't played all their games. But yeah, Helton and Bajunas combined for 17 blocks in the 2 games that they played.
It's crazy.
And Bajunas, like I said, those were clutch blocks. LA had the disc with the chance to win the game, and Bajunas got 2 blocks on those possessions to extend that game, and then San Diego able to get the win. And Bajunas, I believe, scored the winning goal, if I'm not mistaken, as well. So really a wild one for San Diego, but now they're 3-1 in a great position. They're they and Oregon and Seattle have certainly emerged at the top of the pack, and those are the teams I think people are going to be afraid of going into the playoffs. But we've seen a pretty good amount of parity across the league, with the exception of Seattle.
After Seattle, yeah. I mean,
Seattle's going to be big favorites.
Seattle's going to win this league. Seattle's going to win the championship. I would be pretty surprised if they didn't. They look deeper, they look faster, stronger, better. Let's talk about what happened in the PUL. We had 3 games this past weekend. Revolution gets the win at home in Medellin, 18-10 over Monarchs, a highly entertaining contest. I mean, Revo is so good and so fun to watch. It still remains to be seen how they're going to handle this upcoming road trip. But I feel, having seen some other teams in action, I feel better about their chances. You know, I had them like kind of a hot take not to make the playoffs. I'm not sure I buy that now because I don't think it's possible for the New York Gridlock to beat Revolution. New York just getting pasted by DC this weekend. They didn't even crack 10 goals. They lose 20-9. So Gridlock, yikes. So a nice win for DC. DC, Raleigh, Revo, those are your teams right there in the PUL. I think I would be shocked if one of those 3 teams didn't win the championship.
I mean, most of the league has not played 2 games, so it feels like so declarative to be like, okay, yeah, we already know. And for the most part, this confirms our priors. It's convenient for us to be like, okay, well, yes, we were right the whole time. These are the best teams. But it's hard not to feel that way when you watch them play. I mean, these teams look like they are at a different level than the other teams they're playing against. And there are a couple teams that we felt like on the fringes, maybe the Monarchs are going to be this good. Well, they've got a 1-goal win, a narrow win over the Pride, and then they go and they lose pretty handily to Revo. Yep, that's not going to make you look like a contender. New York, obviously a really sad effort for them on the road. Will they probably get better over the course of the year? Sure. They lost some really key pieces from last year. Maybe one of these teams will be the kind of Atlanta of 2019 and not have a sterling regular season, but show up ready to play a championship weekend. But it feels like those are the 3 teams to watch. Portland, Portland's now the 4th spot in our power rankings, and they are in the division with New York, Washington, and Medellin, just like people had feared. That they look like some of the strongest teams in the division. Portland getting a big comeback win in overtime over Austin. They looked really bad in the first half of that game, and then really good for the rest of the game. So I don't know what to make of Portland, their first game ever. Minnesota's going to make their debut this coming weekend. So there's a lot of stuff to still figure out, but like I just haven't seen anybody who looks like they're playing at the level of these other 3 teams. Now, I will say, all of our fears about Revo are about what happens when they have to travel, right? We know they don't have as many pickups this year. Roster's a bit thinner. Some of the players on the roster are a year older. They're going to be playing all of their games in like a 10-day period against the best teams in the league.
Yep.
They're not going to have the home field advantage they did at TEP. Like, it still wouldn't shock me necessarily if they drop games during this road trip. They're playing some of the best teams in the league. But when it comes to championship weekend, where everything it's a 2-game run, if they make it to championship weekend, they're able to ride these stars. They're that good. They're that well practiced at playing together. Being able to run them out have other players run out on defense and then sub them in after the timeout. It's just like, it's a power move. So they're going to be contention.
Leanne Hoffman is going to play for Revo while they're over in the States. Wow. I don't know if I've mentioned that before on the pod, but
you have not.
Yeah.
I don't think I've seen mention of this anywhere.
That's straight from Mauricio.
What a pickup.
Head coach. So I don't know if there's others. We'll see. But yes, that is a nice pickup. So if you want more Western Ultimate League, Premier Ultimate League chatter, check out our other podcast in the Ulti World Network, Double Overtime, brand new, hosted by Jenna Weiner and Sasha Vogel. And make sure, if you're a subscriber, to check out Triple Overtime, their subscriber bonus segment. Keith, every other podcast has a catchy name for their subscriber bonus segment. And we just have Deep Look subscriber bonus segment. This is terrible.
Deeper look?
That's the obvious thing to do, right? Deeper look. I feel like we're chasing at this point, though. I don't know. We had a chance to establish a precedent long ago.
We're late. Look, Double Overtime's living up to their namesake. There's overtime games like every week. There was a Double Overtime week. So
yes, there was.
It's playing right into their hand. If somebody out there has a great name for our subscriber bonus segment, please enlighten us. We need the help.
All right, so let's turn our attention to the upcoming AUDL season. It starts on Friday, April 29th. So that's about a week from now. Broadly, the top teams from last year are still the top teams. I mean, that as a broad statement, that's still true. But we have a lot of changes in the AUDL this season. So let's break down some of the basics, and then we'll get into talking about teams. First thing to know, we have new teams joining the league. 3 new teams, all out west. Portland, Nitro, they join the league. Salt Lake Shred, they join the league. And the Colorado Summit join the league. So if there's been a weakness in the AUDL's sort of geographical coverage, it's basically been those cities, particularly Portland and Denver. But what we've seen from Utah's ultimate scene lately, and the Killjoys playing well at Club Nationals, and just the development of the youth scene there, it's just a matter of time until Utah is putting out a very high-quality team. So those 3 teams are going to be joining the league. We're going back to 4 divisions. So we're getting rid of the mega Atlantic division, and we're going back to Central, East, South, and West. The Texas teams are leaving the West and going back to the South after going to the West last season. So because those 3 new teams are in the West, it makes a lot more sense to bring the Texas teams back over into the South division.
Although it is so weird to have all of your expansion teams in one division. Like, that is unheard weird. Of to me in major professional sports.
The difference is, though, Keith, that it's not like a traditional expansion team in other sports where you have to do an expansion draft and you're coming up. Like, it would be impossible to pull this off in the NFL or something. But because you're just drawing on local talent base, it's going to be perfectly fine.
I agree, although, and we're going to talk about this more, I think, when we start assessing these teams. I do think expansion teams tend to perform a little bit worse than we expect, and the West has not necessarily been the power region among these groups. So could we be looking at a watered-down West this year? Potentially.
It's going to be very interesting to see if any of those teams can be competitive up at the top with, like, San Diego. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Playoff structure this year. 3 teams from the East and the West and the Central will make the playoffs. 2 teams from the South, a smaller division. The 2 teams in the South will just play the South Championship game. Winner goes to championship weekend. The other 2 divisions, you'll have the 2 and the 3 seed play against each other. They will face off against the 1 seed that gets the first round bye in the championship games, and then the winners will all go to championship weekend, which is being held in Madison again this year. So back to Madison for championship weekend, and that will be in August. So that's the basic structure of the season. Remember, we're on a 12-game schedule now instead of 14. Everybody plays 6 home games, 6 away games. There are some interleague games this year across divisions. Not many of them are very interesting, unfortunately. So we don't get like a big, awesome game between, Raleigh and New York or something like that. But, still nice to see some cross-divisional games happening. And this is going to look more... The other thing I didn't mention yet, the Canadian teams are coming back into the East Division, and they're going to be playing competition. It will be interesting, if you're a Game of the Week watcher, you're not going to see any Canadian teams. So that will be... you'll have to kind of seek that out if you want to watch the Canadian teams. It's going to feel a little bit like they're not in the spotlight, I think, because of just broadcast challenges of trying to do games from Canada.
It's an interesting setup. I'm excited for a playoff weekend, and having 3 teams for some of these divisions make it, I think it's going to lead to some real drama. I mean, I can see, going into the last week of play, not knowing who's going to make the playoffs, like having elimination games basically prior to the postseason. You've got a big league now. You've got 25 teams. So it makes sense that we have an expanded field for the postseason, and a more fully fleshed out postseason, I think, could be really exciting.
Let me just run down the teams that are in the divisions so that you might not remember all of the divisional alignments. In the East, you've got Ottawa, Toronto, and Montreal, the Canadian teams, along with DC, New York, Boston, and Philly. In the Central, you've got Indianapolis, Minnesota, Chicago, Madison, Pittsburgh, and Detroit. In the South, you've got Dallas and Austin, and then Tampa, Atlanta, and now the Carolina Flyers. They changed their name from Raleigh to Carolina. And in the West, you've got the San Diego Growlers, Salt Lake Shred, Portland Nitro, Colorado Summit, Seattle Cascades, LA Aviators, and now the Oakland Spiders instead of the San Jose Spiders. So that's 7 teams in the West, 6 teams in the Central, 7 teams in the East, and 5 teams in the South. So
it's wonky. I mean, we talked way back when about the South and the two bid region, the division with only 2 bids, 5 teams. Like it's a bit weird when you have these other divisions that are so much larger but have 3 playoff spots, and kind of weighing the how that impacts the fortunes of some of these teams. You know, who should be excited about being in their new division and who should be upset? I mean, I think Raleigh's probably pretty excited, although maybe they were so secure they didn't care either way.
So here's my question for you, Keith. Before we start to kind of break down each division and talk about, you know, who we think is going to come out into the playoffs, of the expansion teams, who's going to have the best season? Colorado, Portland, or Salt Lake?
Unfortunately, they're like we mentioned, all in the same division, so it's really going to be a head-to-head competition for the most part. And all of the hype I feel like right now is around Colorado. I don't know if that's because their college team's so good or a big name like Jay Frood being on the roster is there. But I'm a little cooler perhaps on this Colorado team, and just maybe that's because I am on the expansion franchises in general. I mean, Boston had a really talented roster last year, and they turned out to be a fairly middling team. And I expect that you're going to see the cracks in the depth for these teams, even if they have some big names. So Portland, you know, Leandro Marks, our own Alex Rubin, who's done a lot of reporting from the AUDL for us, had as Leandro Marks looking like an MVP candidate coming out of the preseason.
Wow.
That's pretty exciting. And they have Rafi Hayes. They have Eli Friedman. There's definitely talent on this team to be excited about. And then, you know, you have the last team, Salt Lake Shred. Save your Salt Lake Lions jokes. I think we're going to see a much more talented group this time around. But it's hard not to have a little skepticism, given that there's not a lot of proven success to the Salt Lake name. So I think I kind of default to Colorado, but I would push them further down the power rankings than, say, the AUDL's preseason power rankings, where Colorado is 8 and Portland's 9, and I think Salt Lake's 15. I think I would push everybody down a step or 2.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's going to be interesting. You know, the Colorado team, they have some established AUDL players from the past. You know, you mentioned Jay Frood, but Danny Landesman has played very well in the AUDL in the past, the Aviators. You have all of the really talented young players coming out of, you know, particularly the University of Colorado, like Alex Atkins, Quinn Feiner. I think this team's going to be pretty darn good, Keith. And, you know, when I look around the rest of the West Division, I'm like, okay, who are they going to lose to? Who are they going to beat? I mean, I think the games between like Portland and Colorado are probably going to decide which of those teams, you know, maybe even makes the playoffs, because I think Portland has a chance to be extremely good too. You know, we've seen what Rhino's been able to do lately in the club division. Rafi Hayes is, you know, like was kind of a surprise cut from the World Games team in some ways. Leandro Marks has had huge moments and looked great in the preseason contest. So look, you know, it's hard to say. I agree with what you say about the depth. I do think that's a question mark, but that's true of all of these West teams, except maybe San
Yes.
Diego. So it's not, you know, you put one of these teams in the East or something, and then it's like, okay, they're going to beat up on the bad teams and they're probably going to finish in the middle of the pack and they probably miss the playoffs. But in the West, I mean, I think there's playoff spots up for grabs right now. Like, maybe we should just start in the West since we're already talking about it. San Diego's still the front runner here, yes?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Unquestioned.
So talk to me about what you think about San Diego and how they're going to fare, especially with some more competition in the division.
Well, San Diego, a lot of it for me comes down to like they kind of have a winning culture. They know what to do. They know how to get back to the spot. And they have the key parts, I think, that get people excited about their team, namely Travis Dunn and Goose Helton. They're both back. Jeff Silverman, Steven Milardovich, like these are the names we've come to associate with San Diego over the years. You know, they lose Khalif El Salam, Jonathan Nethercutt. Those are both big name pieces that were good for them last year, but weren't the engine. They didn't make things go. And they're getting Sean McDougal, who I think will slot in very well. And it's always great to take one right out of the hands of one of your individual rivals. So being able to rip the heart out of another team is obviously good for them. I think that we're going to see San Diego continue to pump out a successful regular season team that will be competitive in the playoffs. They have an identity and they know how to get there. So I expect them to have a pretty big leg up over the rest of the league, which always feels like they're kind of scrambling to figure those things out.
Yeah, I think this team wins the West. I think this team likely qualifies for championship weekend. But after that, I think it's wide open. I think it's wide open. I think it could be 2 expansion teams that make the playoffs with this team. I think we could see Colorado, San Diego, and Portland in the playoff. Seattle is the other team that you look at as a potential option. They certainly have some talent on the roster, but they've had talent on the roster and they've been inconsistent. I don't think we've seen the level of consistency necessary for them to compete week in and week out. So then you look around the rest of the division and it's like Oakland. I mean, they'd have to have a lot of things break right for them to make the playoffs. And LA is going to be terrible. And they're going to be awful. I mean, they could end up being one of the worst teams in the league this season. So then you're like, okay, well, how good is Salt Lake and Portland and Colorado? Because I think my guess is we see San Diego versus Colorado in a competitive game in the championship round. Although I do think Portland has a great chance to make that interesting.
There very much is. The both expansion teams make it is very much in play. Or even two, I guess, if you want to throw Salt Lake in there, just because there's nobody else to be afraid of in this division. I just can't buy in on Seattle. I want to, Charlie, so badly. It makes me think so much of the Washington College men's program. Like, I look at the team and I'm like, wow, on paper, this is just like so many good players. How can this go wrong? But they just don't bring it week in and week out.
That's right.
They don't travel well. I have to harbor some skepticism. But because the rest of the division also leaves me with the same skepticism, I think maybe that'll allow me to buy into the fact that they will be good enough to make the playoffs.
They finished last in the West last year.
I know.
3-9, Keith.
A lot of the talent is going to be pretty similar.
Yep.
But I don't know, man. It's a weird team. It's a weird team. But Manny Eckert's great. They have a lot of veterans. Maybe there's a lack of buy-in. I'm not sure exactly what the deal is there. But you're right. I mean, I think LA's taking a step back. I'm not expecting Oakland to be elite. I think they'll, be a competitive team that sneaks a win. That's the kind of stuff we've seen out West before. So it's really is a toss-up after you get to that second spot, and it almost will be kind of like a war of attrition. Like, whoever can not get mired in the muck could just emerge as the best team, only to get throttled in the divisional final.
Salt Lake, that's going to be an interesting team. Got to keep an eye on that team. I think their depth is not going to be there. I think the bottom half of their roster is probably going to be kind of bad, but they have great coaching in Bryce Merrill. They have a bunch of BYU guys who are very legit. And then there's some other players from around Utah, like Nathan Huff, who's had a great season for University of Utah, Utah State's Garrett Martin, and a great youth program. They're going to be young, but I think they could be more competitive than people expect. I don't think at this point I feel like I can pick them into the playoffs, but I think some teams are going to go to Salt Lake at altitude and lose games they shouldn't, because Utah is going to be tough and they're going to also be taking it seriously. The big question mark is, can they get enough time together to build chemistry? And I don't know. They got a lot of players from all over the region.
You hit on something that I think will be a big advantage, is that they have a lot of motivation. I expect them to have a high level buy-in. I expect them to be a fantastic team at home with a ton of home support. I mean, this is a thing Utah Ultimate can rally around to say, hey, look at us. The opportunity they never get.
Right.
Watch us go out here and compete with the best. This, I think, will be a rallying cry for them. I think that this is going to be kind of their superpower. They will have a young team, but they're going to have a lot to prove. And I think that they're going to be really excited to try and do that on a big stage. So I expect Salt Lake I think that they get a little bit of off-paper boost. They have a little bit of the intangible boost that I'm not sure might be there for a team like Seattle.
Let's move over to the South Division. Obviously, Carolina will be the heavy favorite here. And, frankly, the Flyers, they're kind of running it back. Like, a couple people leave, they pick up a couple young, talented players, but the core of this roster is the same one that won a title last year. And they should have absolutely no problem winning this division and getting to championship weekend. And the real questions are going to come at championship weekend. So maybe we'll save our discussion of them a little bit more, and once we start to talk about our semis picks and on to who we think is going to win the championship. But yeah, they're a significant step above the rest of this division. I think Atlanta was a playoff team last year. Are they better, Atlanta? What do you think, Keith?
I don't know.
I think it's fair to say that it's a little unclear.
Yeah, the thing that has made Atlanta great over these past few years has been their ability to develop a high chemistry unit, right? And integrate new pieces. I think Antoine Davis maybe struggled a little bit out of the gates because he was unfamiliar with the system despite his unquestionable talent. And they're probably going to have some of the same experience integrating some of the new pieces this year. Khalif El-Salam, Bobby Lay is going to, and Bradley St. have probably played a bit with some of these other players in club play and other spaces, but they'll probably have some of the same things going on too. I do think that having El-Salam and St. who are these defense first players, like that's going to be something that they can work with. I think that's going to help Atlanta. So maybe I think Atlanta is going to be slightly better this year than they were last year, but I don't know if it's going to move the needle to get them past anybody else in the division that they need to because it's so competitive. I do think it may keep them ahead of an Austin team that I like as one of my sleeper picks.
Atlanta could have one of the best defenses in the league. They did last year.
They should be expected to,
and
right?
Now they're adding two very strong defensive players. And, Bobby Lay probably slots in on the offense for them and gives them another thrower. I'm curious about the team. I think Antoine Davis, very good, but you saw his limitations in the game against New York. When you put him in a position where he has to be a thrower, he tends to make mistakes. And if you can keep him from being just crushing you deep, which he's obviously capable of doing and did at multiple points last season, I actually think in some ways Davis may be a better fit on New York where he heads to, and we'll talk about them in a little bit, because there's just not they have so many strong throwers that just will not be required of Davis. They can put him on the defense or they can put him on the offense. Very versatile player, but I think it when you look at Atlanta's roster coming up, adding in the players that they do, I think it fills the hole of losing Antoine Davis. Their offense may look different, but I think that they'll still be a successful team. I just don't think they're going to be better than Raleigh, and I don't think it's going to necessarily be that close.
The ultimate question, I guess, for Atlanta to me is John Stubbs.
Well, yes.
Right? He played 6 games for them last year, and when he was there, he's one of the best players in the league. Like, how much John Stubbs do they get? If they get more John Stubbs than they got last year, they're probably going to be better. If they get as much or fewer, that's probably where their fate lies.
We just got to play that clip where it's John Stubbs chasing out a disc. John Stubbs. That's a throwback for some folks.
It is a throwback. That's a deep cut. I do think that they may benefit also just from the growth of some of their younger players, some of the guys who've playing for this Georgia team. How's Hayden Austin-Nab going to continue to grow? Yeah. Will they continue to recruit from that group? Adam Miller's been a part of this team for a little while. He's probably going to be able to take on a bigger defensive role than we've seen in the past years. And that'll help deal with some of the potential aging players that they have as well. Carl Eckwurzel, Carl Endzone. I'm really looking forward to seeing his growth this year. Eli Jaime. There's some talent. Sneaky pickup. They picked up Eli Monica. I didn't know that. We'll see what they end up doing with him. But I look, they're certainly in contention to be in the favorite to take the second spot in this division. And they're going to have to go through Raleigh. I think if they play their best game and Raleigh plays a good game and not a great game, I think this team will be good enough to beat Raleigh. But I'm not counting on it.
I like the take. So tell me about you. You think Austin is a sleeper pick? I mean, I think
Look,
Austin's clearly the other team that has a shot at the playoffs, with Dallas and Tampa probably having no chance.
It's crazy to say that about Dallas, but the Legion, it's a new era. But look, Austin was the team that we slept on last year, and basically they bring the whole group back, right? All the players that we were like, wow, I can't believe how good this team is. Your Evan Swiatex, your Vinay Valsaraj,
Evan Broadbeck,
Evan Broadbeck, Mick Walter, like. Who is Mick Walter? He's awesome. It turns out. Matt Armour is like one of those grinders that people love. Elliot Moore is going to be better. Chambers brothers, and they're getting Kyle Henke back. So, look, I am excited about where this team could go. I'm not sleeping this year. In fact, I'm jumping on the bandwagon this time around. I think that this is one of those teams that like they don't have a lot of discernible stars, although Henke coming in can help turn that around. But they put out a bunch of good players who play well together. So I like this team. I think, however, they may struggle from the fact that they feel a little bit like Atlanta in that high chemistry is part of their benefit, but worse at it. So I think that could be a challenge for them. But, if Atlanta slips, like I think they are firmly in position to take that second spot. And I think they would be a tough playoff team in any other division where they didn't have to go through Raleigh.
Good point. I think here's going to be the keys for Austin. They have got to win their home games against Raleigh and Atlanta.
Ooh, that's
like you gotta bring your best roster, and you need to game plan for those games 2 weeks ahead of time, and do everything you can to win those games, because it's going to be hard to go on the road and win against those teams. So you need to at least give yourself a chance by winning your home games when they're traveling, and they're going to probably have a weaker roster, and they're going to be dealing with the back-to-back with Dallas and whatnot. That's going to be critical. And I think, it's also a matter of not trying to do too much with, any roster changes. Like Kyle Henke comes back, make sure that you put him in a position to succeed and don't break what was working last year. I think, the team will have a target on its back a little bit more. I think one of the advantages that they had last year is that people didn't think they were going to be that good. Remember when Dallas came out in the first game and Austin beat them, and it was like Dallas looked totally shell-shocked. I mean,
Dallas had taken all of Austin's best players, theoretically.
Yes. And like Dallas was probably the better team on paper. They were clearly not that good. They were not as good as people expected them to be. But Austin was like, you know what? We're not going to beat a little brother. We're going to win this game. And they did. And then they beat him again. I love it. That was a great story from last time around, but now they won't have that advantage of having Dallas saunter in and assume they're going to win just by showing up. People are going to actually prep for them and play hard. And, I think it'd be an advantage. I think it'd be good for them if they can finish above 500. They were 6-6 last year. Even if you don't make the playoffs, finish 7-5 and, take a step forward this season.
They just feel like the kind of team that we're going to get to the end of the season and they're going to be on the outside looking in. And I'll think that they could have finished second in like all the other divisions.
Could happen. Anything to say about Tampa or Dallas? I mean, Dallas is just roster's totally gutted. And Tampa loses Bobby Lay and Andrew Roney. And I mean, they're just going to be dreadful. They may not win a game in their division.
I don't know what to make of Tampa. I guess, I'm not going to belabor the point on them. I am curious what their identity is going to look like because it's been so tied up in let's give the ball to these couple of guys and let them throw anything they want. Yeah. And however many turnovers they take, we don't care. Like, we'll deal with that. I don't know what their identity is going to be. So they feel like a blank slate to me. We've seen the coaching staff change over. So I'm curious what they are. But I mean, they could be worse than Detroit this year. The Tampa versus Detroit. Can we? If that's not an out of region game, then I want to see. Like, give me that one, AUDL.
No. We're not going to give Detroit a freebie, Keith. We're not going to give Detroit a freebie. They got to go out and earn it this season and try to break the streak. Okay, so let's go over to the Central Division and let's talk about Detroit first and foremost.
I just want somebody mark down this timestamp because I know this is going to be in Tampa's timestamps right there. You just called them a freebie for Detroit. I didn't say that. Charlie did. Just remember that.
Detroit is actually going to be kind of good this year, Keith. I mean, they're not going to be good.
Feels like a stretch.
They're not going to be good, but I think they're going to win a game. I think they're going to win a game. In fact, I will put money on it right now. If you don't think they're going to win a game, I'm happy to bet on it right now.
Wow. I don't know if I thought enough about, but you will not be the only person talking about this bet. So, I think you're going to be able to find a taker, even if you go off of this podcast.
The concern that I have is that some of the signings they have, like things start to fall apart mid-season and like people start no-showing games and it's like a total disaster. Because let's be honest, the franchise is a dumpster fire. It's awful. They've been so bad for so long. It's incredible that they're still in the league in some ways. But they signed Johnny Bansfield, Nathan Champeau, Jake Steslicki, James Highsmith. Mac Hecht is going to play with this team. I saw his name on the roster and I messaged him and I was like, are you playing? Is this you? Like, is this Mac Hecht or is there another Mac Hecht that I don't know? And indeed, he is going to play. He's recovering from surgery right now, but he's going to play some games late in the season. Sorry,
I'm imagining another Mac Hecht. Like, there used to be 2 running backs in the NFL who had the same name, and like people in fantasy football would accidentally draft the bad one instead of the good one. I can't remember who it was. That's what if there was a second Mac Hecht and you got all excited.
Hang on a second, and I'm gonna have it put it on the screen if you're watching on YouTube. Look at the Chartok brother here. That's not Elliott on New York. Look at this. I was like, wait, is Elliott on? Did they like copy his picture twice here and like put him on the roster twice on accident? They look so similar. Incredible. Okay, so back to Detroit. Look, they have some actual talent on the roster. Other teams routinely send terrible like game day rosters to play against Detroit. Maybe that will change this year because it won't just be an automatic win. The other thing is that, Detroit almost won games last year. There were a couple times where they were in a game late and had a shot, and they are going to just be so much more talented now. Like, I think that they can score with more consistency on offense and give themselves a chance in some home games. I think they're going to win a game.
There are certainly things that point in your favor. I mean, having 2 teams that have been weaker teams in the league in Pittsburgh and Indy in your division, that's helpful, right? Somebody travels on the road and you're the back end of a double header. Like, that could certainly benefit you. And we've seen Detroit come close on some of those in the past. Late season situation where Minnesota or Madison Chicago has things locked up and they're coming to visit. Maybe they're not sending in the full roster or whatnot. You also have, is there any team more motivated to get a win, no matter how meaningless it might be on paper, than Detroit? Absolutely not. I mean, this is a team that wants that W. They're going to be hungry for that W. But like you, I'm a little concerned about the buy-in here. I mean, this is not an organization that has a great history of getting buy-in, right? So I'm nervous about that component. Like, is the leadership going to be there to get these players excited about being there, to get them bought into playing an identity, a Detroit mechanics ball, whatever it is? I'm curious. I do, however, agree with you. I think if I had to pick, I'd say they're going to get a win. I mean,
okay,
getting to play against Pittsburgh and Indy is going to be really increase their chances.
Yeah. Let's talk about the top of the division. Last year, Chicago was the best team, although Minnesota sort of had to snatch defeat from the jaws of victory in order to let Chicago through to the championship weekend. But I think Minnesota is going to be the top team in the division this year as we head into the preseason and get ready to go here. You take a look at returning most of the starters from last year. They bring in Abe Coffin, which is on his own a big deal. I mean, I'm already talking to other people in the Central who are like, really do not want to deal with facing Abe Coffin. They had Tristan Vandemortel as well, Rami Paust. They've stolen some players from other teams. They've added some other top Minnesota talent, and Chicago's gotten worse. And when you add up those things and how close they were to getting to championship weekend last year, this is the team to beat in the Central Division this year.
I think you're probably right. We saw them kind of adapt a new style of play, which I think Abe Coffin will fit well into. I mean, you could really see him pairing next to Andrew Roy and, playing this high level of possession offense that I think they could thrive with on offense when they have this defense that can go out and take the disc away with guys like Dylan DeClerc and Colin Berry. I think that they took some real steps forward last year. Nick Vogt kind of feels like a potential centerpiece offensively. He and Cole Jurek are kind of the young stars on this team. I think Rami Paust, I was really excited by the way that he played with Madison last year, so I'm very curious what he'll do for them this year. Vanuka, Will Brandt, the young guy, got a lot of great run last year. He could be on a real big trajectory. He could be kind of a breakout player for them this year too. So there's a lot of reasons to be excited about how the wind chill set up going into the season. And maybe most of all, it's that it looks like Chicago may have taken a step back.
Yeah. I mean, Chicago is losing Keegan North, Vaughn Allen Gielan, Peter Graffey, Kurt Gibson. So they lose some key players. They're still going to be good. They're still going to be a team that can be fighting for a playoff spot 100%. Like, they're going to get into the playoffs. And they could be the team that qualifies. Like, when you look down and you see that Pavlianis and Paul Arders are on the team, like, their offense is going to have a chance to go and score with a lot of consistency against anybody. And it's not, they almost beat Raleigh at championship weekend last year. The thing is, I just think they lose a little bit too much from their defense to be able to overcome that. With Minnesota getting better, they're getting a little bit worse. I worry about the depth a little bit more now for Chicago. I think we got to play the games to find out. Paul Arders is a beast and could keep them in games. So we'll see what happens. I just think, they lost too many of their key starters, even though they still kind of have their stars.
They're gonna need some people to develop and step up. Your Eli Artemikises, your Jason Valleys. They're gonna need some of these guys to step up into bigger roles this year, because it's hard to say they didn't lose some of their top end cachet. And Keegan North was a really critical part of what they were doing on offense.
That's
on the
true.
other side, I think all the hype's going to be on Nate Goff going into this season.
Yes.
Maybe
off the World Games selection.
Is he going to have to dial it back? Is he going to be like, it's the World Games year? I don't know. I don't know what's going to happen with that. Keep an eye on that.
I certainly imagine him taking some games off right before that tournament. And during the tournament, of course. Yeah, I mean, it's very plausible. You don't want to get hurt playing AUDL game right before World Games.
Especially not in the regular season.
And there's going to be some practice weekends and whatnot. Like, he's probably going to miss games.
Which when you think about him being potentially the player that was really going to break out, put together an all AUDL season, join Pavlianis is really the star of this team this year, that concerns me that there may be a little less of him present than you would like if you were just your average Union fan.
Well, those are certainly the top two teams. Can Madison compete in this division? They went 7-5 last year. They were third, so they would have had a playoff spot if there were 3 spots last season. Can they compete?
The things that I've said about a couple of the other teams that have that external motivation, that thing, that intangible effect that I talked a bunch about that with the Salt Lake Shred. That used to feel like that was Madison, right? They were the team that always felt like they got more. They were more than the sum of their parts. They squeezed every bit of talent out of their team and did it with great home fans. They were one of the most difficult environments to play in, a great organization. They still have a lot of that, but it feels like the shine wore off a little bit, right? It didn't carry them in the way it did last year. And I don't think you could stack them up and say that, hey, this roster is as talented as what you're going to see from Minnesota and Chicago as well. So I do think it's going to be tough sledding for Madison. I do think they will continue to outperform what they have on paper, but they might just be too many steps behind Chicago and Minnesota to really get back into it.
Yeah, I mean, they got their Madison crew coming around. They've got a bunch of these so they got some old dudes on this team. Like Tom Annan is back on this team. Like, I thought that dude retired like 4 years ago. But they also pick up some young guys who are pretty good. Kai DiLorenzo. And how about this? Kai Marcus.
That's out of nowhere.
Out of nowhere. I saw his name on the roster. I was like, what? And indeed, he is there. And he's actually, I think he was out of the country for a year or two and is now back and playing for Madison. And he was really good in college. Do not forget, like, he was a great player for UNC. We'll see if he brings some of his antics to the AUDL.
Well, they also got Zach Braun to add a little bit of depth. I mean,
Yeah.
I think Kai DiLorenzo, I'm very intrigued by what he will do.
Yeah.
I think a lot of the attention will be on the flashiness of Kai Marcus, but Kai DiLorenzo was a force at Division III college level. So I'm very curious to see how big of a role he can carve out for a team that's probably looking for a big offensive playmaker to take a step forward. We know the defense is going to be good. That's what Madison's done for a long time.
Yeah.
They've got KPS. It's their identity. Who's going to drive the offense? They got a lot out of Victor Lowe last year, but Rami Paus was a big part of that. So I'm curious where they're going to generate the offense. And Victor Lowe had some really good moments. I think he ended up like second on the team in yardage behind Paus. So they lost Paus, who led the team with almost 5,000 yards. But Victor Lowe had 4,500 yards to his name. He had a couple of inconsistent efforts, some weak games where he had a few more throwaways than I think you want. But he could be a really key offensive piece for them if they do want to have the good offense they're going to need to compete with these other teams in the division.
Pittsburgh went 1-11 last season, playing in the Atlantic. Now they get to go back to the friendly confines of the Central, where they get to play worse teams on a regular basis. The problem is, I still just don't think they have enough talent. Max Shepard, CJ Colicchio, good players. They have decent depth. I just don't think they have enough star level talent to really compete in the division. I think they got a shot at getting the third spot in the playoffs, but that's kind of the extent of it. The good news for them is that Indy and Detroit are still going to be mostly easy wins. Hard for me to see Indy doing much this year. It's kind of just trying to bring the same guys back and improve to 4-8 this year. They need to have an infusion of talent if they want to go anywhere in this division. They can't just keep doing the same thing with the same guys who are starting to get a little too old and expect to be able to win.
Their big ad from the offseason is Ian Engler, who is a great rock-solid handler, like a guy who can really drive offense. But
for Pittsburgh, you're talking about.
For Pittsburgh, yes.
Yeah.
Not flashy. Not flashy. So I get why there's not a lot of excitement for this team. I still expect them to be a grinding team, but I think you're right. I think the top end is just a little too thin for them to make up for it by being a hardworking, deep team. So it's going to be tough sledding, I think, in the Central.
All right, over to the East. Gosh, I don't know what to say about these Canadian teams. Last year was weird. They had their own little mini competition going on. Let's talk about this. Who's going to be the best team? Montreal was clearly the standout last year. They won the Canada Cup. They went 7-2. Do you expect them to be the top team again this season, Keith?
I sure do, Charlie. I sure do. In fact, Montreal to me is going to be pushing for a playoff spot.
Okay, I like it.
I think that people are going to be underestimating these teams because they didn't see them much last year. I wasn't high on them going into the Canada Cup, but when you look at the players that they're bringing back, I mean, they have guys who were tearing it up. Jacob Brissett, Sasha Poit-Sokolski, they were awesome. Kevin Quinlan's still there. So he's going to be, the veteran presence, a big playmaker in the backfield for them. I mean, I think that Montreal has a chance of being really good. They're obviously the top of this division is going to be beyond the reach of them, I think, but I do think that they're going to be able to battle for one of these playoff spots.
Well, I mean, and the thing is, like, it looks like to me like Ottawa's probably the second best team here. Led by Nick Boucher, Jeremy Hill. They're not going to be a playoff team, but they're solid. Toronto, this team is unrecognizable compared to what we saw in the past. Toronto used to be a team that would auto qualify out of the East. For years, New York was trying to beat Toronto, and they just never could do it. And finally, New York cracks through and beats Toronto. And now you don't even know anybody on this roster. They have 16 rookies this season. So it's a full reboot in Toronto. Maybe they'll be kind of fun and new and interesting. I don't think they're going to be good. But it's surprising. But like we've seen the era of, your Mark Lloyds and your Andrew Carrolls and your Cam Harrises, it's kind of come to an end for the Rush.
Not kinda. I mean, it's over. It's a new chapter. You're right that this is going to be a young team, an inexperienced team. I think that's going to potentially hold them back. They will be excitable, so don't be surprised if they sneak an upset somewhere because of that energy and that youth. But that exuberance can only carry you so far. I mean, they basically feel like an expansion team. I think they will be worse than the expansion teams, and I don't think that's really a hot take or anything, but. The organizational power that you get by being a long-established team with a winning track record, like, kind of feels like it's out the window for them.
Well, New York, clearly the team to beat in the East, coming off the win last year in the division, get to the championship game, hang tough with Raleigh, and then they add Antoine Davis this offseason. In some ways, I think it's even more important that they've added a bunch of key depth pieces, guys like Ethan Fortin, that are going to help them, because one of the problems they had last year is they were heavily reliant on their top guys to go out and kind of carry the load. Against the worst teams, their D-line was able to do lots of good work, but they really needed a lot from Jack Williams and Ben Yacht to go out there and get the job done against the top level competition that they would see in the big games in the East, and then of course the championship weekend. So they're reloaded. The real question is going to be, will they win the title? I do not expect to see them have trouble qualifying out of the East this year.
I don't either. Yes, their depth for when you stack them next to Raleigh might look a little thin, but like, what other teams are you looking at that are much deeper than this?
Fair.
To be able to put out 5 or 6 like all AUDL players like takes a lot of the work off of your depth, because suddenly one of your stars is going up against somebody else's depth. And then, Charles Weinberg, he was one of the best players on Minnesota. They pick him up. Saul Rushmeyer-Bailey had a great year for them last year. They cloned Elliot Chartok, as you mentioned earlier. So now they have 2 of him, and he led the team in yards last year. So I guess having 2 Drosts at some point, that wasn't enough. Now they got to have 2 Chartoks. So John Lithio, big step forward. I'm way less worried about their depth than you are. You're right that it was the potential like championship flaw in them when you're talking about going up against the best of the best. But I think that they've got enough pieces here, and that you're right that those depth additions are the thing that are going to make the biggest difference for them. Even though getting Antoine Davis is great, he's going to probably be extremely effective for them. But
do you think New York had a better offseason than DC? Because DC basically didn't lose anybody of import. And they added Delrico Johnson, Tyler Monroe, Dave Cranston, and Alan Kolick.
I'd say it's like roughly equivalent. I mean, how much value do you place in keeping Jack Williams and Ryan Oscar?
It's pretty important.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what threat they were to leave, but it was something of a surprise for them to join the team originally. It still feels like this is part of their offseason, but I'd say they're pretty close, pretty comparable in what they did in this offseason. I get why people are excited about DC. Don't get me wrong. I mean, they had points where they looked like the best team in the league last year, and there's just very few teams that you can say that about. So they are one of the few teams I think we're going to come in with. This team has the potential to compete for a title. That's where they're going into the season, though. And the excitement is very real. Joe Richards was awesome in his breakout year. I mean, they had 4 or 5 guys who felt like they had breakout years.
I mean, AJ Merriman was like a D-line almost MVP candidate. Like, crazy.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
And then
I think, the question is, you see some of these names like Cranston, Kolick. These guys were great 5 years ago. Are they still great now? Like, especially Alan Kolick. I'm like, I really don't know if I should expect much from him.
Someone on Twitter said he's washed, so...
I think there's promise, because you're starting to see some of the names that have been conspicuously missing in the past now signing up for the team and adding to what they were able to do last year with Malks and Merriman, Richards. Keep in mind, they do lose Merrill, which that hurts. He was really good for them.
And to some degree, I know this sounds crazy. Like, there's a diminishing return on depth. Like, you can only play so many people, right? You can only put 7 players on the field. So, like, if you have 29 good ones, like, yeah, it helps when you're traveling on the road. We saw it last year. They sent, like, basically a second-team defense out there and still looked crazy good because they had, like, 9 Bergerons who all get crazy layout blocks. Yes, it's helpful, don't get me wrong, but you can only leverage it so much, especially when you get down to the championship weekend. So, I kind of feel like they need a little more star power. What are we going to get from Rowan McDonald this year, speaking of star power? Last year was like, is it an aberration, or is this what we should expect from Rowan McDonald moving forward?
Who's going to play on their offense? I assume Monroe will play on the offense. Obviously you got Malks out there, Richards. But the problems for them came down to the offensive line last season when they lost to Raleigh. They needed to have more O, and they didn't have it. And, Rowan's going to have to play better for them to get out of the division. Simple as that. I expect them to get a regular season upset over New York, per usual, and otherwise probably lose in the conference final.
Did they have Christian Boxley last year? He's on the roster this year.
I am not remembering. I think they did.
That feels like if that's a signing, people are not talking enough about that. He's not listed as having any stats for last year. I don't think so.
Well, so maybe not. No, I guess not. He played back a few years ago, 2018, but I guess he wasn't on the team last year.
He could pop. That's huge.
That's a huge addition. That's a huge addition.
Box is fantastic, and could be the offensive playmaker to fill in for that kind of Joe Merrill role. You start to see. You add Boxley and Monroe to the O line. I mean, there's your cutters. Right. You could probably get some reps out of Kolick on that offense. I'm starting to like DC. The shape of DC is starting to make sense to me. It's definitely making sense. Okay, let's talk Boston. They finished 5-7 last year. They had one of the best offenses in the entire league, and maybe the worst defense. Just awful defense. Can they get it going defensively? That's going to be the question for me. I mean, I don't really have a question about their offense. They do lose a couple key players. You mentioned Engler leaving already. Henry Babcock's going to be gone too. He's been a really nice piece for them. But they'll have Tanner Johnson, Halkyard, Orion, Ben Sadok, Halkyard. But is Halkyard gone? I think he's gone. They lost him. Yeah, I'm saying they lost. Wow. He's a huge loss for them. That is a big loss. So what do you expect from this team? I think they're still going to be exciting. When you put Orion Cable, Tanner Johnson, and Ben Sadok on the field together, exciting stuff is going to happen. Ben Sadok is one of the most exciting players in the league, but he's a high-volume guy, and I think he will continue to be that. He's going to come with some turnovers. I don't know that I see necessarily them getting a lot better here. They lost some really key pieces. I don't know that they necessarily addressed the things that were problematic for them last year. So, I still think they will be competitive, but I don't really see a reason for them to take a big step forward. Right. And then finally, we got Philadelphia, Phoenix. They're kind of a fun team. You've got Nate Little out there making plays, James Pollard, all the longtime Philly guys like Mott and Esser. I don't know if there's necessarily a big leap forward in terms of the roster. Tyler DiGirolamo is playing for Philly this year. How about that? How much Ty D are we getting? Reuniting Ty D and Alex Thorne, by the way. I don't know. Does he still have it? I don't know. That guy he is super talented, and if he is training and tuned up and good to go and stays healthy, he could be a great player in the league. I wonder if he has some issue. His biggest advantages were physical dominance. So if you're taking some of that away from him, whether it be due to age, injury, or both, I don't know that he'll necessarily be the same player. I still actually like this Philly roster. I kind of liked it last year. It's kind of a nice team. Right. So I was a little disappointed with the way that they performed last year, and that keeps me from wanting to jump on board this year and kind of taking them and expecting them to do really well in this division and compete. But Jordan Ryan is on this team. Ed Brown, these are Adam Grossberg is a young kid who played with the AMP this past year. Paul Owens. These are players that could do really exciting things. To join someone like Nate Little, who I expect to have a breakout year this year and really start to push for all AUDL kind of consideration. But I just don't know if can they bring all the pieces together?
Yep.
That's the part that doesn't make sense to me. All
right, pick your playoff teams in the East, Keith, in seeded order.
All right. Oof, it's tough. Well, the top's not tough. I think you got to take New York. I certainly talked myself into DC as the second team while we were doing this conversation. The third spot is a challenge for me. I got to put it between Philly and Montreal. Oof.
No love to
so
Boston.
Tough when you. Yeah, I like Philly and Montreal. I kind of just laid out my case for both of them.
Sure.
Look, let's take Philly. I'll ride with Philly.
Wow. All right. I like it. I'm gonna take New York, DC, Montreal.
Okay.
Yeah, I think Montreal showed us what they can do, and they're doubling down. They've got their pieces coming back. I think Boston's lost a little too much. I don't necessarily see where the defense is going to be coming from with that team. We don't exactly know how those Canadian teams are going to match up, so we'll find out soon enough. But I like the Philly sneaky pick. That's kind of a spicy one. We'll see what they're able to do.
Surely, nothing could go wrong with it.
All right, in the Central, I'm going to go with, at least for the who makes the playoffs out of the regular season. I'm going with Minnesota, Madison, Chicago. Yeah, I'll do it.
Wow.
I'll take the upset.
Wow.
For the regular season.
Didn't want to pick Detroit to win, huh?
No, not the playoffs.
You gotta have some gusto, Charlie. I gotta take the same three teams, but I'll take them in the more traditional order: Minnesota, Chicago, Madison.
All right. So on to the South. Two teams making it out of the South. I mean, I think this is pretty obvious, but maybe you're gonna go with Austin. I'm taking Raleigh and Atlanta.
I want to, Charlie. I really want to, but I just can't take Austin over Atlanta. I think Atlanta does what Austin does better. So I'm going to take Raleigh and Atlanta.
And then out west, three teams. Keith, who you got?
Oh, man. Is this the hardest one? I think this is the hardest one.
Yes.
All right, so I'm obviously taking San Diego to win the division. But what happens after that? I feel like there's four teams, and I could see maybe five teams. Oh, man.
It's the same thing that happened last season. I mean, there was all kinds of parity behind San Diego last year.
Oh, I kind of talk trash on Colorado, but it's hard for me to see another team that's going to be that much convincingly better than they are. So not necessarily that I think they're going to be really good. I think Austin will be better than Colorado. I'll say that right here. But I think I got to take Colorado to finish second. I don't know. Maybe Salt Lake could pull it off in their first year, though.
They could. There's three teams in their first year, and they're the better teams than the old legacy teams.
It's gonna be tough. It's gonna be a tough place to play in Salt Lake. I feel confident in that. It's gonna be tough to play there. All right, I'm gonna take San Diego, Colorado, and then don't make me regret this. I'm gonna take Seattle.
Wow, Seattle of all teams. No, I don't even consider them right now. I'm taking San Diego, I'm taking Colorado in the 2 spot, and in the 3 spot, I think I'm going to take Portland, but I won't be shocked if it's Salt Lake. So
I'm hoping that the closer proximity of these other teams to Seattle gets Seattle more bought in. Maybe they'll travel better because traveling to Portland is so much easier than it was to travel to freaking San Diego.
I've got San Diego going to championship weekend with a close win over Colorado in the championship game.
I've got San Diego, and you know what? Screw it. I'll take San Diego over Seattle.
Wow, he's all in.
Seattle,
folks.
Make it all the way to the division.
There's plenty
final.
of talent. They could do it.
And look, if they get to the playoff weekend,
Keith, how many times do you want to get hurt by the Seattle teams? You're out here, going crazy for UW, and then they let you down every time. And yet I could have picked UW. I'm going to bring this back up later this year when Seattle's 1-5.
Oh my gosh, I'm going to eat it. I know it. Okay, but I'm still rolling.
Okay. In the South, I have Raleigh over Atlanta.
Yeah. I got to take the same.
You got to do it. In the Central, I have Chicago getting the upset over Madison in the first round of the playoffs and then losing to Minnesota. Minnesota finally getting over the hump and getting to championship weekend. I think this is their year.
I'm also going to take Minnesota to advance. I have no idea what happens. I mean, I feel like if Chicago's got to play at Madison, like maybe I'm going to give Madison a chance, but otherwise I think I got to take Chicago. And I have them ahead of Madison. So Chicago losing to Minnesota in the divisional final there.
All right. And then in the East, I'm going to take New York beating DC in the in New York in the conference final.
I think the same thing. I think we could be in for a thriller, Charlie. I mean, that feels like it could be the another insane game like what we saw
DC
from New York last year.
Plays so tough against New York, and they're better this year. So love their chances.
DC do you think there's a good chance that DC is the third best team in the league?
Absolutely. I mean, you got New York and Raleigh, and then who? The other playoff
why not
teams?
DC, right?
Minnesota, San Diego, DC. I mean, you tell me. I mean, DC was a great team last year.
At that point,
they
I
just
think
lost to a better team
saying
in the playoffs.
You're comparing DC probably to San Diego, Atlanta, Minnesota, right. Chicago.
Yeah,
that's my guess.
I don't know about Chicago. I'm not as high on them.
I get that.
But yeah, I mean, I think they definitely could be the third best team in the league. So we agree. We both have New York, Carolina, Minnesota, and San Diego in the playoffs. So who you got going to the final, and who you got winning, Keith?
There's no way if both of us pick it that the Chalk's just going to all.
I don't know.
Right? Like there's just no chance.
It's the best teams.
I mean, we've established what we think is up here, which is that New York and Raleigh are a step above everybody else, and so if they can meet in the final, that's what I'm taking. Express apologies to the wind chill, but they just haven't been there before. So even though I think that they're talented, and San Diego has been there before, but we've seen what happens. So I'm taking New York and Raleigh to go to the final, and I'm taking New York to win this thing.
It is not impossible that Minnesota could go undefeated and get a top seed, and it could cause Raleigh and New York to have to face off in semis. Definitely possible.
Ooh,
definitely possible.
Take.
But I'm just gonna roll the dice and assume that they won't meet in semis, and say that New York and Raleigh are going to meet in the final again, rematch. And the big question, Keith, who you got?
I mean, New York. I'm taking New York here. Raleigh is good. New York's also good. So it's feels like a coin flip, and I feel like New York is going to have a lot of motivation to come back and get this win.
Yeah, I hear that. I do. I am worried about the hangover effect for Raleigh. On the other hand, they're really good. They're really, really good.
And they're young. They're not exactly getting long in the tooth.
They're getting better right now, right? They're on the upswing of their talent, not on the decline. With New York having some players that are getting pulled in other directions, with World Games and such, I do worry that could cause some issues for them. Raleigh, ready to go. They only have this to focus on. I mean, Jack Williams is playing for New York, not Raleigh. So I think that they're going to defend the title. I think this is the best team in the league right now.
Carolina Flyers championship incoming could be.
Back.
I think the World Games point is a great one, and I thought maybe should have thought more about that. But I still look. New York added some key pieces that can help them weather that storm. Having a player like Antoine Davis join the team is gonna give you a little bit of insulation when one of your stars isn't available.
It's true. Well, so there you go. That concludes our AUDL season preview. The action begins on next Friday. And Game of the Week will be broadcast. I don't know if we talked about this on the pod yet. I think it came out earlier this week. Game of the Week going to be broadcast on FS2 again, but they're going to have 6 games aired live this year on FS2, not just on the replay on Wednesdays. So some live action on cable TV for the AUDL. Games will show generally on Saturday nights, sometimes live, sometimes at 11 or even midnight, because they had other programming in the way. But then the games will also re-air every Wednesday in its normal time slot from last season. So that's an interesting little move there, Keith. The championship game will be carried live. That's pretty cool.
Exciting. And, after the way that championship weekend went last year, I'm looking forward to another thriller, which we have months from now. Hopefully we get the opportunity to bet our hard-earned American cash dollars on these games, because writing Beth's perspective was so fun last year.
Question marks about DraftKings right now. Sounds like the Friday game of the week that was kind of sponsored by and paid for by DraftKings not coming back this year. And so unclear right now whether they're going to have lines up for these games. But
Charlie, you're going to have to set lines for our Discord, and maybe we can get a bot that manages everybody's like Discord.
Ooh, I like that idea.
Or whatever. And they could bet that. Maybe we got to get our tech team
idea.
On
That's
a
great idea. Our lines are going to be better than the lines that DraftKings put out. That's for sure. All right. So that is going to do it for this edition of Deep Look. Looking forward to talking about college regionals next week, and semi-pro action continues this weekend in the Western Ultimate League and Premier Ultimate League. For Keith Raynor, I'm Charlie Eisenhood saying so long, and we'll talk to you next week right here on Deep Look.